I absolutely love restaurants that offer Sunday brunch buffets. A brunch buffet is loaded with breakfast and lunch foods, and deluxe buffets offer omelet stations and carving stations. And I love them. Because as we walk through the buffet line, we can load our plates with as much food as we want, as many times as we want. Trays filled with bacon, sausage, eggs, and carving stations with turkey and prime rib fill my heart with great joy. And we know without a doubt that we will not go away hungry. We may go away feeling slightly ill, but we will not go away hungry. And the problem with a really great, oh, look at that picture. The problem with a really great brunch buffet is self-discipline. Taking only what we know we can eat, rather than taking way too much of everything in sight, takes self-discipline. And self-discipline at brunch buffets is really hard to learn. When the Hebrew people followed Moses into the wilderness, at first they were thrilled. They had left Egypt loaded down with gold, silver, and jewels that they had taken from their Egyptian masters. And the people were pretty happy about that. But they had not left with enough food for the journey. And the people were most definitely not happy about that. So the people went to Moses to complain. They said they would have been better off staying in Egypt. Yes, they would have been slaves to Pharaoh, but they would have had more than enough to eat. And now they were free, but Moses had taken them out in the wilderness to starve to death. God, through Moses, heard their complaints, and God told the people that every morning they would be able to harvest bread called manna from the ground. And manna was a really tasty, really flaky, a lot like a really good elephant's ear. And it was also really healthy. Yeah, right. And they would be allowed to harvest 1 quart for each person in their household. The only condition was they should only take enough of that manna for 1 day, because God would always provide what they needed, but they had to trust God to continue to provide what they needed. So the first day, most of the people went out, and as the dew lifted, they saw this really fine, flaky stuff, as fine as the frost on the ground, and they went out and took only what they needed for the day. However, some people played it safe, and they took enough for a few days, because, well, let's face it, they didn't really fully trust that God would give them what they needed every day. So the next day, when they opened the jars that they had put all the stuff they harvested into, they realized that the manna was now rotten and filled with worms. Boy, that'd turn your stomach. God would provide, but they had to trust God completely. Now, trusting God to provide what we need when we need it is a really hard lesson. Trusting God and then taking only what we need is an even harder lesson to learn, because we want to say that we will trust God will provide what we need, but that lesson goes against almost everything that we have been taught. I don't know about you, but I was raised by parents who taught me to save for a rainy day. You get what you get and give 10% away, save to 10%, and live on the rest. It took me a long time to learn that. At the first meeting I had with my financial advisor, I was told before I invested anything for my future, I had to have at least $2,000 set aside for emergencies. At the time, $2,000 set aside just to stay there for emergencies seemed ridiculous. Also impossible. Because we have learned to depend on ourselves if we're going to be okay now and in the future. And I forgot that my financial advisor told me if I wanted to retire someday, I'd better better start saving for retirement. And I said, but I get this pension from the church and I get Social Security. And she said, yeah, and if you want to retire in the lifestyle to which you will become accustomed, you better start saving something now. We have all learned that we depend on ourselves if we're going to be okay for now and in the future. When the pandemic hit, I stood in line at a Walmart's down in the Milwaukee area for an hour with people whose carts were filled with toilet paper, paper towels, and disinfectant wipes. No food, just those things. Saving ahead, planning for shortages, and having more than we need is a way of life for many of us. Because depending solely on God to provide what we need when we need it feels counterintuitive. And that was certainly how the Hebrew people felt. Yes, God was going to provide quail in the evening and manna in the morning, but the idea of trusting God completely was as foreign to their experience as it is to ours. Like the Hebrew people, we believe hard work provides what we need, that we work hard to earn what we need. And like the Hebrew people, we've not yet realized that the work we do, the hard work we do, depends entirely upon the gifts and abilities God has given us. Our ability to earn a living, our ability to get along in the world, depends completely on the gifts, the talents, the time, and the abilities with which God has blessed us. Because the day that we realize we are completely dependent on God for everything we have and everything we are is the day we begin to trust God completely. Yes, we work for what we have, but we are able to work because God gave us the abilities we need to do the work, to earn our daily bread. Now, the Hebrew people who followed Moses had to learn to trust God to provide for them. God gave them manna, but they still had to work to harvest the manna God provided. I mean, this stuff was as thin as the frost on the grass. Imagine bending over every morning, out in the grass, out in the field, to pick a quart of manna, a really thin, flaky, delicious pastry, as fine as frost on the ground, up off the ground for every person in your family. My back aches just thinking about it. God provided, but the people had to do something to get it. God provided the manna, but the people still had to work for what they needed. God gives us time and abilities, but we still have to work for what we need every day. And because we work for what we have, many of us forget that we are completely dependent on God to give us the abilities, the gifts, and the opportunities we need to feed ourselves and our families. It's too easy to become convinced that we are self-reliant, that we've done this all ourselves by the sweat of our brow, rather than trusting the bread from heaven. We become believing that we are self-reliant, rather than thanking God for giving us the ability to feed ourselves and our families. And when we are convinced that we are fully self-reliant, it's really too easy to believe that we have deserved everything that we have. Because the goal for most of us is not to just have enough, but to have more than what we need. And the ideal for most of us is to become filthy rich, so that we don't need anyone or anything else. We can depend completely upon ourselves. But the problem comes when we begin to treat God's gifts to us like a brunch buffet. We use our God-given gifts to not just take what we need to be full, but to take more than we need. And like the Hebrew people, when we take more than we need, we end up feeling sick. Trusting God to provide what we need is a hard lesson. Trusting God and taking only what we need is an even harder lesson. But God gave us an object lesson to help us learn and remember those lessons, and I truly love object lessons. See, God told Moses to go out one morning with 2 jars about 2 quart sizes to gather manna and put them in those jars and then keep them there forever. That those jars of manna would not rot. Those jars of manna would remain pristine. But they were never to use those jars of manna, but rather to hold them up as an example of what God provided. That when they needed, God would provide what they needed. So, our assignment to help us learn and remember that God will provide what we need and what we don't need is to find an object lesson in our homes. What is something that was given to us at a time that we did not expect it, but it was something that we absolutely needed? And to take that something and put it in a place where we will always see it, so that we can always remember that God has provided what we needed at the time that we needed. Or if we don't have an object, most of us have a story about a time when God provided what we needed out of the blue, exactly what we needed, completely out by surprise, and it's what we needed. And it was exactly when we needed it. For me, that story is about the sale of the church in Two Rivers coming exactly the week that we ran out of other money to pay for this building. God provided exactly what we needed, exactly when we needed it. And when I go home today, I'm going to write that story down, and I'm going to post it on my refrigerator. Because who of us does not go to the refrigerator first thing in the morning? I do. I could put it on my bathroom mirror, but I'm too busy looking at this, that, or whatever, before I remember, oh yes, I'm supposed to look at myself and say three things I like. No, I'll put it on my refrigerator and I'll say, that's right. God provides what I need when I need it. God provides what we need when we need it. So take that memory, write it down, put it on our refrigerator. That's our object lesson. Like those 2 quarts of manna. So that we never forget we can depend on God completely. Because God has given us everything we need exactly when we needed it. We like to believe that we're self-reliant, but let's face it, friends, we're not. We like to believe that we can do it all ourselves, but let's face it, friends, we can't. We like to believe when the chips are down, we will come through. That doesn't work either. We are completely dependent upon God. And God will give us what we need when we need it. But most of us need something to help us remember that, especially when we begin to doubt. Especially when we begin to believe that we are really self-reliant. We're not. See, trusting God to provide and learning to take only what we need are lessons that really change our lives. And they are lessons that really change how we approach brunch buffets as well. Amen.